Shalom, shalom, Boker Tov. Hope everyone's having a wonderful day. Looking forward to learning some Sefer HaChinuch with you today, to learn the Mitzvot, the Taryag Mitzvot, the 613. Particularly around this issue of the politics of exclusion as they relate to the Korban Pesach. We already did a session that covered five or six different mitzvot as it relates to the Passover offering. And this is the second segment we're going to do that looks at this issue of Korban Pesach, particularly around who may participate and who may not. And this will get extended into the issue of who's invited to the Seder each year now as well, because the two become interconnected. So first, Mitzvah 13 says, Shelo nachil min haPesach liYisrael meshumad, not to give an apostate any part of the Passover offering to eat. Because we learn here in Shemot 12:43, in Exodus 12:43, Kol ben nechar lo yochal bo, that this foreigner should not eat of it, right? So the Chinuch here says, since we prepare this offering as a sign and a commemoration that at the time we came to shelter under the wings of the Shekhinah, of the divine presence, and we entered the Brit HaTorah and Emunah, we entered this covenant of Torah and faith, so it is not fitting that we should give someone who has turned against this, leaving the community and denying our faith, any of it to eat. Because the idea around the Korban Pesach was that this is about community. This is about solidifying Klal Yisrael. That those who are bought in and committed are to be a part of this. Right? Because prior to Kant, we didn't think the question was, what is the good? The assumption was everyone knows what's good, and now you choose between the good or the evil. It wasn't until modernity that we truly understood this idea that the good itself wasn't clear. Right? It wasn't just an authority-based idea. So there was an idea that there's the true and the untrue, and do you choose the right side or not? Right? So too, part of the thinking here was that faith, that the realm of belief was interconnected with the realm of virtue. If you didn't believe in the true, then you clearly could not be committed to the good. And so we see this tension here as well. Not to share Pesach with someone who rejects the faith is the idea here. And this is hard for us to understand in modernity and certainly post-modernity, where we understand and embrace a diversity of belief. We embrace a skepticism. We embrace a humility that we don't have the full truth. And so it's very difficult to understand this pre-modern idea that those who don't understand the tradition as we do are to ultimately be excluded. But again, this is deeply connected to the idea that there was no skepticism. There was no question. It was only one who was rebelling against community, ultimately, who was rejecting this. It wasn't an epistemological category. It was a moral category. Clearly, anyone who's rejecting the faith is rejecting the community. Okay, so Mitzvah 13, Shelo nachil min haPesach liYisrael meshumad, not to share with an apostate the Korban Pesach, is around this idea here of ensuring that the Seder experience is one of those committed to the Jewish faith, to the belief. Then we get to mitzvah number 14, Shelo nachil min haPesach leger v'toshav, right? And this comes from Shemot 12:45, Exodus 12:45, that says, Toshav v'sachir lo yochal bo, right? That a resident and a hired servant shall not eat of this Korban Pesach. Right? And the idea here is that the Pesach experience is one of historical memory. This is an experience that is particularistic to the Jewish narrative. And that while we value cultural exchanges, we value partnerships, deep relationship, the Pesach experience is unique in that it is a family experience. It is a Jewish experience. And so there's many times where we encourage hospitality beyond the Jewish boundaries. But Pesach traditionally is not one of the times where that is encouraged. Pesach is the unique time in the year that should be a uniquely Jewish experience so we can tap into our unique traumas and glories as Klal Yisrael, as the Jewish people. We have our great deal of share of traumas and glories, and that Pesach should be reserved, the Seder should be reserved for the Jewish experience. This is the unique time of year. Okay, a Gentile wants to experience Rosh Hashanah, they want to experience the Sukkah, they want to come to a Purim party. Okay, so there's a lot of room there, but traditionally the Seder is a unique Jewish experience. Okay, so mitzvah number 13, not to invite a Jew who rejects the faith into the experience. Mitzvah number 14, not to invite a Gentile into this experience, even if we have very close relationships with them. Now mitzvah number 17, Shelo yochal arel mina Pesach. This one is gaining traction here in the 21st century. Not to invite someone who is not circumcised. It says here in Exodus 12:48, V'chol arel lo yochal bo. No uncircumcised person shall eat of it. It says in Exodus 12:48. Now, this was quite obvious historically, that one who chooses not to be circumcised, a Jewish man, Jewish boy, Jewish family that decides not to circumcise their son, is rejecting the Torah, they're rejecting God, they're rejecting the Jewish community, they're rejecting all of Jewish history. This was quite obvious. There was no kind of liberal movement against circumcision prior to the last few decades. This was merely a sense of opting out of the community, of a rebellion against the community. And so one who did that should not be a part of this. Now, today we, of course, understand the importance of inclusion and of hospitality. And certainly there's no prohibition of engaging Jews who have opted out of circumcision, although we encourage Brit Milah, the importance of this historical covenantal commitment through circumcision. We certainly don't exclude Jews who have opted out of that. Okay, so mitzvah 13, not to include Jews who reject the faith in the Seder, in the Pesach experience. Mitzvah 14, not to include Gentiles, even those we have very close relationships with and a lot of respect for. Mitzvah 17, not to involve those who have opted out of circumcision. Now, mitzvah 487, we're kind of jumping forward. Shelo lahakriv korban Pesach uvavamat yachid, not to offer up the Pesach offering on an individual's provisional altar, right? Because there's a history of private altars of animal sacrifice and public altars. So what does the Chinuch say to explain this? That we're forbidden to offer up the Passover lamb on an individual's provisional altar, even at the time when such altars were permitted. In substance, the meaning of the provisional altars is that every individual Israelite whose desire it was to present an offering would build a structure anywhere they wished, and they would present their offering to God before the construction of the chosen central sanctuary. Yet even at that time when it was permitted them to do this, that meant specifically with other offerings. As to the Pesach offering, the Korban Pesach, however, it was never to be offered off anywhere but on the community altar, because it says in Devarim 16:5 and Deuteronomy 16:5, it says, Lo tuchal lizboach et ha-pasach ba'achad she'arecha. You may not sacrifice the Passover offering within any of your gates. Now this gets us to the central theme. That the central theme here is community. The Seder is about the freedom of the Jewish people from bondage, so that we wander in the desert for 40 years, to then build Medinat Yisrael, to then enter Eretz Yisrael, to enter the land of Israel, and to build our state, to build our homeland. And that is a particularistic story. It's not, there are universalistic dimensions, but it's about the unique Jewish experience. And so now we have to wrestle in modernity and postmodernity with these four challenges that emerge out of the 613 biblical mitzvot. To review them briefly one more time, and then we're going to unpack them. Mitzvah number 13 means not to invite into the Pesach experience a Jew who rejects Judaism. Mitzvah number 14, not to invite the Gentile, even the Gentile we relate very closely to, into the Pesach experience. Mitzvah number 17, not to invite the uncircumcised male, the uncircumcised Jewish male, into the Passover experience because of the deep connection between Brit, covenant, and Yetziat Mitzrayim, leaving Egypt. And then Mitzvah 487, that although some offerings historically could be offered on a private altar, the Korban Pesach could only be offered on the communal offering. All of this is getting us to the place of building the unity of the Jewish people, building the collective of Klal Yisrael. And so we see in these 4 mitzvot that we are striving for this type of unity experience, this collectiveness. Now, how do we relate to this as a halakhic issue today? Because today we're not bringing Passover offerings, we're not bringing any animal offerings, thank God. That's a historical experience, but not the reality today. Interesting conversation. Do we yearn for a third temple? Do we yearn to bring these offerings once again? Let's bracket that, because in our previous session around the Pesach offering, we looked at that. Today, the issue becomes Seder. That in our Pesach experience today, because the Seder is modeled off of the Korban Pesach experience, off this commemoration of Yetziat Mitzrayim, of leaving Egypt, that was the pinnacle of the year through the Korban Pesach experience. Today, that's the Seder experience. The Seder is not just fun. It's not just games. It's not just family. It's not just good food. It's not just interesting stories, right? But it is profound spiritual consciousness around our history of leaving slavery towards the radical spiritual presence of the moment that we're embracing and eating matzah and embracing the various rituals of the night, the profundity of the questioning element, the humility and the radical existential fervor that comes with awe and wonder, and the future yearning for geula, for redemption in the world for the Jewish people and for all people, in the homeland of Israel for the Jewish people and for all people in the world that should have freedom. So now the halakhic question emerges: who may we invite to the Passover Seder? Because many say we may not invite Gentiles to the Passover Seder. Now, the first question actually emerges: may Gentiles halakhically be invited to Yom Tov, to Shavuot and Sukkot and Pesach? On Yontif, can we invite Gentiles? Now, this is not an issue by Shabbat. No one is going to say inviting Gentiles to a Jewish home on any normal day is a problem. Of course, it's a beautiful thing of hospitality. On Shabbat, a beautiful thing of hospitality, of getting to know each other. The question emerges on Yontif. And the reason it emerges is because of Ochel Nefesh, because there is a permission to cook from an existing flame on the holidays in a way that doesn't relate to Shabbat, because it's Ochel Nefesh, the joy of the holiday, and we may, under certain guidelines, prepare food on these holidays. So we learn in Talmud Bavli Beitza 21b, in the Babylonian Talmud here, Beitza 21b, that based on Exodus 21:16, no work may be done on them, except for what must be eaten for any person. Only that may be done for you, i.e. for you and not for Gentiles. On this holiday, we prepare extra food with the permission for Jews. Rav Yehoshua ben Levi said, one may invite a Gentile to a meal on Shabbat, but one may not invite a Gentile on a festival, on Yontif, on the Chag itself. This is a decree, this is a gezerah, lest one come to cook more on this Gentiles account. Okay? Now this comes down in the Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim 512.1, section 512, number 1, where it says, the Shulchan Aruch says, one may not cook for Gentiles on Yontif. It's therefore forbidden to invite a non-Jew, lest you come to cook more on their account. The prohibition only applies to an invited guest, but with regards to a certain historical other categories of Gentiles that were sent to them, and a Gentile who shows up on their own, it is permitted to feed them, and we're not worried that the Jew will cook more because of them. Then the Haggah, Rav Moshe Isserles in the Ramah, says it's only permitted to increase the food for the slave and the maidservant, these historical categories, in the same pot that the Jew uses for themselves. But when it comes to other non-Jews, these invited guests, it's forbidden in any way. So that's the original halacha we see. But many, based on the Meiri of Provence, 13th century, just into the 14th century of Provence, southern France, where the Meiri, of course, famously says that these notions of Gentiles, of idolaters, is different in our time, those who have gedurim b'darchei hadatot, those who have restrictions on their moral codes, on their legal codes, based upon their religion, we no longer treat as idolaters. Because the Meiri says, over in Beitza 21b, on his commentary, here on this Talmudic passage we just learned, he says, the reason one cannot prepare food, this Isser Hachana, one cannot prepare food for Gentiles is because it's malacha, it's forbidden category of work, and we have no food need for it, since we're not responsible for their food, for these idolaters. For when the Talmud mentions non-Jews, it means people who are idolaters. He says, Stam Goyim in the Talmud is dealing with those engaged in avodat ha'elelim, right? Those who are doing idolatry. But the Meiri says now the Gentiles we are in relationship with today are not idolaters, and thus we're not concerned with preparing food for them. Rav Yaakov Love, who at the time was the chair of the Department of Halacha at Chovevei Torah, writes here that the Talmud prohibits inviting a Gentile as a guest for meals on Yontif, lest one cook a separate dish on the holiday for the previously unexpected guest, as we saw. But he says it would be permitted to invite a Gentile, to invite a non-Jew before the holiday, if either any special food they may want or need is prepared before the holiday, or it is clear that the guest will eat what everyone else is eating also. In this case, it is permitted to cook more of the food for the guest, as long as no separate dish or pot of food is cooked on Yontif for the guest. Okay, so that was dealing with this issue of Yom Tov itself, right? Because of this unique permission to prepare food in unique ways on the holiday, there was a concern of inviting Gentiles because they don't fit into the permission for which cooking was granted within this legal code. Again, if you're operating outside of the halachic framework, all of this feels absurd. But those who are operating within a halachic framework, this of course makes sense. Now we get to the unique question of Seder itself, Pesach itself. Radical hospitality with Pesach. We say, halach ma'anya. This is the bread of affliction. Let all the hungry come and eat. Let all who are needy come and share this meal with us. This is the essence of what hospitality is about. In fact, we learn that Avram Avinu, the Rambam says, if you look over in Hilchot Matanot Aniyim, the laws concerning gifts to the poor, 10:1, that hospitality is so important because this is the path of Avraham. And this was deeply a part of why Avraham was chosen by God, right? Because he was committed lasot tzedakah u'mishpat. He was committed to tzedakah, and a big part of tzedakah, of doing justice and kindness into the world, is about hospitality. The Rambam says, based on Avram. And Rav Kook actually says over here, if you look over in his Haggadah Shel Pesach, in Perish Olat Ra'ayah, page 26 of that edition that I have recorded here, he says, actually, this is about an invitation to participate in the rebuilding of the Jewish people in the land of Israel, right? And again, Rambam goes further and says this is also about hospitality. It's not only about them participating in the mitzvah of building, it's also in hospitality to those in need. Okay, now here we get to two sources that deal with who may be invited. Rav Matisyahu Gaon, one of the Gaonim in 9th century Babylonia, says, now that our Gentile neighbors outnumber our Jewish population, we provide for them beforehand so that they will not go begging at the doorways. He says, we're very concerned with taking care of Gentiles along with Jews, because as we know from the Talmud already, we know that we support the non-Jewish poor along with the Jewish poor. This is very, very important. And because of this obligation, we also want to make sure around Passover time we're taking care of the poor Gentiles and poor Jews, those who are struggling. And so we strive to do that before Pesach, since the Pesach experience should primarily be Jewish. But Rav Yaakov Emden is going to go even further. Excuse me. Rav Yaakov Emden, who has radical reads on Christianity, by the way, source for another time, says, let all who are hungry come and eat. It seems to me simple here that this, of course, is referring to non-Jews. He doesn't say, okay, it's a b'diavad, it's after the fact, Gentiles want to be a part of this, what do we do? And so actually he says that it's built into the hospitality, the non-Jewish poor, that we support the poor of Gentile nations, along with the Jewish poor as well. And so we see here Rav Yaakov Emden goes further than Rav Matisyahu Gaon in this commitment of hospitality, of hachnasat orchim, great mitzvah, in the seed of following the path of Abraham, that we also invite non-Jews. Okay, so here we're going to conclude, wrapping this up, that Pesach is the unique holiday of the year that is the most strongly connected towards an insularity, towards having Jews in particular at the Seder experience. And there's a commitment to hospitality and towards taking care of the poor, but that this is about a family experience, that we achieve our universalism through our particularism, right? Cynthia Ozick writes about the shofar. If you try to blow the shofar from the wide end, you can't make a sound. But if you try to blow the shofar from the narrow end, you can make a beautiful sound. So too, we achieve our universalism through our particularism. We blow the shofar through the narrow end in order that we can have the shofar blast coming out of the broad end. So the Pesach experience is about talking about our historical collective traumas and glories, the traumas of slavery, the glories of redemption, so too the traumas of the Shoah, of the Holocaust, and the glories of Medinat Yisrael, of the founding of the State of Israel, and other traumas and glories of the Jewish people. And this is a family experience. That's the traditional idea. Now, it should become clear now, based upon our learning of the Meiri, of how we relate to Gentiles today, and based on Rav Yaakov Emden, that Gentiles are also included, halach ma'anya, in terms of the radical hospitality, that, of course, when it comes to Gentiles, and of course, when it comes to family members, many Jews have Gentile family members, spouses, children, siblings, parents, cousins, that this is, we should be open to engaging them as well. Supporters of the Jewish people and of Israel, of course, can and should be included, and those who are inspired by Yetziat Mitzrayim, by the Passover story itself, should be included, because Martin Luther King and many other civil rights activists have drawn upon the Exodus. Right? He didn't draw upon the Jesus story for the civil rights movement. He drew upon the Moses story. The central theme for Martin Luther King was Moshe on top of the mountaintop and looking out at the promised land, right? This has been a story of inspiration for many. And so we want to engage others in that story as well. So to wrap up here, we see there's 4 mitzvot that emphasize the politics of exclusion in order to prioritize those most deeply committed to the Pesach narrative. And yet we see today in modernity and post-modernity that we want to preserve that central ethos of bringing people together who can strengthen us on Pesach and give us chizuk, give us strength to go fulfill our moral mission in the world, that we should bring redemption to the world. And it should be a night where we're using shared language, we have shared questions, that we're supporting each other in our pursuit of justice in the world, and yet at the same time, we maintain our commitment to diversity and towards being inclusive and being hospitable towards others, that we should engage as well on Shabbat and on Yom Tov and on Pesach itself. I give us all the bracha that in our unique experiences this Pesach, that we should find the right balance between having family and community together that strengthens us, and also finding the right balance between having a solidified experience of shared values while also being inclusive to those who may hold different values from us as well. Because this is sorely needed among the Jewish people and in America today, to have spaces where we can have respectful discourse with those who view their political and moral and religious ideologies as different from our own. Chag Sameach. Have a great day.